Hello and welcome to Connecting to Game, a video game podcast about, well, whatever we want to talk about whenever we want to talk about it. That's what the podcast has turned into. But today, we have a special treat because it is the day after the Game Awards 2024. And so Andrei Zanescu,
hi,
my longtime co-host, is going to walk us through the Game Awards, some of the notable winners, the notable premieres, the notable exclusive world premieres, some Muppetry, some celebrity action, and I will be here asking questions about the Game Awards.
I did think of you immediately when we went into Statler and Waldorf land.
There weren't enough of them.
This is interesting because I got comments that there were too many of them from other people.
There were like 3 clips of them.
I think Muppets are a generational divider between millennials and Gen Z based on who I'm talking to, where I am seeing some greater love.
Next year, Swedish Chef.
Let's go.
The Game Awards are orky dorky. Right? Okay, so that's our intro into the show. And the way things are going to go here, because I didn't prep anything. This was fairly impromptu.
It's all on me.
Andrei is going to be doing a lot of the heavy legwork, and I will chime in with, much like Statler and Waldorf themselves, commentary from the peanut gallery.
Hell yeah. So I think one of the best ways to get into this discussion is to think about, or to explain to the audiences what the awards are, their history, where they come from, how they're built, and how they actually function internally. Because I think it's easy to tune into this show and not know too much about it, and then really talk about this 10th anniversary show, which is actually a bit weird because it's the 10th anniversary, but it's actually the 11th show, which I that's like a thing to think about in terms of the discourse around it.
Well, it's the way all these institutions, like, WrestleMania and like the Super Bowl, you always have to find a reason to make this one the special one.
But I understand it's because of how the organization begins. So maybe we just start talking about like where this comes from.
Get into it.
So the Game Awards have been around nominally for about 10 years. First show in 2014, founded and primarily financed originally by Jeff Keighley with help from a lot of studios, including Sony Interactive Entertainment, Microsoft, and a bunch of other studio like participants that you can see on the Game Awards website, including Kojima Productions and some people who get shout outs regularly every year, Nintendo included. And that came out of the previous Spike Video Game Awards, which are called like the Spike VGAs or what have you. These are the TGAs. Yeah. And the Spike Video Game Awards were run by Spike TV, a channel that has since become Paramount, I'm pretty sure. And it was a Tennessee local news network before that. So the Spike VGAs had like this very like juvenile, churlish, frat boy humor and vibe to them. Right. And Keighley didn't start working on the show until a couple of years into them, I think around 2007. And then he becomes increasingly important to running the shows. And by 2013, the Disastrous VGX, that is like the last one of those, run by Joel McHale, or like hosted by Joel McHale.
Spike TV was the channel with like Deadliest Warrior, right?
Yes. Okay. So from 2003 to 2005, Spike's motto was the first network for men.
Right.
And this was the vibe of like very aggro, like 2003 Attitude Era. So they got big into like broadcasting wrestling. Yeah. They had a lot of musical components that were like new metal and alt rock. You're like deep in that space right now.
Absolutely.
So
check out my other podcast.
And then from 2005 onwards, they changed to more action. There's a realization internally that the show is the network's actually appealing to an increasingly female demographic, which they weren't prepped for. Right. And so they kind of shift. And the show was starting to shift with them too. Snoop Dogg, which appeared yesterday, hosted the show as well, and Sam Jackson did. So there's a big fusion of Hollywood and the game industry at this show in a way that feels like the industry was always subordinate to Hollywood for a very long time. Right. And in the early years, not only subordinate, but the object of the joke. Yeah. So the show was kind of like, don't you love games? Here are awards, but you also suck. Right. And 2013 kind of pushed that to the maximum, and it kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back. So Keighley leaves. Spike doesn't option the rights to continue the show, and he just kind of makes his own, which is separate, but I think greatly informed by the existence of the prior. Like, you can think of the Spike VGAs as like a testing ground for these. Not to mention that Keighley had worked on Cybermania 94, the first televised awards show run by the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, where he wrote packages at the age of like 12
When
or
was
13.
that?
94.
94? How do you get into that?
So his dad, his parents actually are executives at IMAX.
Okay.
Great friends of Christopher Nolan, who are often involved in pushing for premium large format showcases.
Okay.
So they're the kinds of people who are like, it's important to watch movies in IMAX formats because the experience is better. Like
awesome.
they're like format purists or evangelists, if we want to talk about
so
them that
they
way.
got him like a summer job.
So his dad apparently knew Andrew Zucker, who was the entertainment lawyer out of Century City who founded the AIAS to run that first show, because he loved the Emmys. And he was like, well, if the Emmys can make a show that's kind of like the Oscars for TV, maybe we can do what the Emmys did, but for games.
Yeah.
And
completely reasonable.
Cybermania is, at the time, kind of set up to model the Oscars, but they were also fighting another show that was supposed to model the Cannes Film Festival and the awards there. And there's like all this 1994 jockeying that I'm not going to get like super into. We can have another episode about Cybermania 94 because it's kind of crazy.
Cursory Google shows me Leslie Nielsen from the Naked Gun series and Jonathan Taylor Thomas.
Yeah, JTT. Also, Robert Culp. Letters in from presidential VP at the time, Al Gore, about the power of the internet. It's very 90s. And William Shatner is reading the packages.
Oh my God. Imagine Al Gore being on that at the same time when like the parental advisory stuff is going on. And you're like, but video games are great.
So he's not on it, but he writes a letter in which the designer of the Cybermania statue and logo, painter Peter Max, is reading about the power of games as Leslie Nielsen is having wrestlers fight each other, and there are little people like flipping plates. There's a lot of like that sidesman, like that sideshow weirdness that keeps coming back. Yeah. Like the Statler and Waldorf stuff is, I think, a lot more part of the DNA of the show than people realize. And one of the complaints that we've seen over the last like 10 years or so is like, why don't we just have more games people on the stage, right? I think last night was a pretty good example. So as always, hosted in the Peacock Theater, which is run by NBC, I think. Right. Hosted by Jeff Keighley. And it's kind of the shape of the show, I think, is like fairly set in stone. The awards haven't really changed in a couple of years. He always hosts it. The sort of like pre-show that has a lot of smaller awards shunted out of the main show is certainly true. So things like Best Fighting Game, Best Indie, I think also got like put into one of those like small interstitial. We're jamming like 4 awards with like no recipients.
Which they commented on in the show itself.
So this is interesting to me.
Which I felt seen.
So I guess I can talk about this now because it will inform how I'm thinking about this.
Let's do it.
I am working on a book about this. Yeah. So I've been reading a lot of material about these shows, and I'm like super interested in thinking about them relative to controversies that have been happening with the Oscars and the Globes over the last couple of years. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I really want to put on the table before we get into like the show itself is the structure of the voting. Yeah. Because a lot of the taglines that you hear about the Game Awards are video games biggest night or the Oscars of video games. They're not run like the Oscars. Okay. The Oscars are a guild award. So to vote at the Oscars, you have to be part of the guild. Mm-hmm. And to be part of the guild, specifically, you have to be part of the branch that you want to vote in. So if you want to vote in the director branch, you have to be part of that branch. To be part of that branch, you have to have some number of credits. I think the director's branch is 2 or 3 shipped movies, and you have to be co-signed by existing members of the branch. So as much as we feel like the Academy, when we think about the Oscars, is like too large or nebulous, it is actually kind of self-regulated as a network of professionals in all the branches.
Right. Okay.
The exception is Best Picture, I think, is voted by the entire Academy. So that's the main difference between Best Director and Best Picture,
Right.
which is like cohesively, like all the branches are coming together to say like this is the best one.
Gotcha.
Now, there is another organization that the Game Awards resembles much more closely, which is the Golden Globes. And that was run by the Hollywood Foreign Press Association for a number of years. It's been reforming. It is getting somewhat better, as my understanding. Listen to any Ringer podcasts about the Globes that have been like rolling out.
Right.
You can get a sense of that. But that is a press association. And so membership is determined by the governing body of the Globes, and the press association votes insofar as they feel they want to award certain things. Now, the Game Awards is like that. So at the top, you have Jeff Keighley, and around him, you have a network of studios who are like the board of directors for the Game Awards. This includes people like Kojima for Kojima Production, but it includes Epic Games, Microsoft, Nintendo, Sony Interactive Entertainment. I think Sega has a seat. It's somewhere a couple of dozen people, really. And that board decides which journalistic outlets get accredited, which runs around the 118 to 121 mark, and it shifts every year. So certain outlets die out, new ones are added, and they are global. The United States has a lion's share. When I was doing counting a couple of months ago, I think the US gets something like 30-some votes. China, Brazil, the UK, and Japan are other big locales that have, I want to say, around like 7 votes each. So it's one vote per journalistic outlet that is accredited. So for example, Polygon, as an entire institution, votes once.
How does Polygon determine the vote?
I don't know yet, but I will be talking to people soon to
fantastic.
Report on that at some point in the future. I would assume that it is different in each case because some companies are large, like Vox, which runs Polygon, or Kotaku, which it has its own editorial board. This is a couple of journalists who get together and they do this. There are places like the Hollywood Reporter, which also have votes, and the LA Times, and that might be, for example, left up to the discretion of the individual journalist if the entire organization is not sufficiently committed,
right? Versus
individual blogs that are run by 1 or 2 people in other countries. And this is the case. There are many, many countries where you're going to have 1 or 2 outlets for the entire country. Romania is a country like that. Egypt has, I think, a handful. The MENA region is grouped together. So like the entire Middle Eastern, North African region actually has is displayed on the website. These are all publicly listed, by the way.
Yeah.
And if you want to know what it was like in every year, you just Wayback Machine it to like the day before that show, and you can find the roster of votes and how it's shifted. But it's not developers.
Yeah.
It's not guild members. And this, I think, plays significantly into some of the issues with the show that I'm like interested in thinking about. For example, the fact that, there have been claims of payola in the past, and we are talking about a press body that awards games to a show run by companies that they depend on for access codes for coverage.
No, nothing could possibly go wrong there.
And I'm not saying like this is not me claiming like
it's not accusatory.
No, I'm not entering the journalistic integrity discussion. But I think even at a subconscious level, this plays in how people feel about certain games.
Right.
I would like to not think that is the case, but until I have like some ironclad proof that there is like very strong separation of ethical commitments, it's weird. Like at the very least, and there is an organization that does run like the Oscars, which is still the old AIS, the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences, which runs the DICE Awards, and DICE is a guild award. Like it is structured very similarly to the Oscars.
But I'm curious, in either case, I mean, we know like Oscar campaigning is a big part of that, and I don't quite see why the press version would be immune to that same kind of appeal with the additional element of like the corporate leverage you're talking about, which is you need copies of the games early to do what you do as a company. in addition to appealing to their taste-making ability.
Right. My sense would be that, so a good example of this is what happens at the Oscars every year, which is like, let's say you want to vote in any branch, you get a full list of every movie that's been released. And automatically what happens is people have to make a selective choice of how many movies they can actually watch. These are practicing professionals who have other commitments.
Yeah.
They can't sit and watch 800 movies a year. And with games, that would be like the same case. Yeah. Even if it's 100 games, to tell somebody who is also like practicing to say like you have to play all of these games fully to like get a sense of what they are. And so people tend to pick things that they hear about, or games from studios that they know or that have some kind of external reputation. So there's muddying of the waters in both cases. I would imagine that the main difference is that the journalistic body has one set of biases based on critique, which they do constantly, whereas guild bodies have a different kind of bias based on production. There are a lot of internal factors that you might never hear about. So for example, there might be quirks and complications with running production on like a single player, like a solo made quote unquote game like Balatro or Balatro. I don't know which one it is. This has been a long ongoing discussion, or like a AA game or a AAA game. Right. Journalists also are aware of this, but it's different. Like their level of proximity to this is very different. And we're going to get into it when we talk about the makeup of what a game of the year looks like a bit later. But I just want to flag that because this is like a bit of a misrepresentation to say it's the Oscars of gaming. It isn't, and I don't think that diminishes the importance of these awards for the field, but I do think that structurally is just not true. Like they have a different function.
Yeah, but I mean, I suppose it's not the Oscars of gaming structurally, but from the cultural point of view, it certainly is. It's all we have.
Well, so here's the thing, right? Again, to keep the parallel like fresh, the Academy, when they vote for films, that is one aspect of their mission. The other aspect is the Academy Museum. So they are a historical organization that is interested in preserving the craft, or some kind of like, there's a museum now. They do like public tours. They have a front-facing organization, which DICE has. So the AIS, if you go on their YouTube, constantly has podcasts and interviews with game developers, people who preserve it, studio heads, writers, artists, the whole shebang. And so you're constantly getting like a lot of that cultural makeup. So as an organization, I wouldn't say that the Game Awards is doing what the Academy does for the Oscars. As a show, in terms of visibility, I do think you're right. There is something that happens to this show when it becomes the largest one. And I don't know the numbers for this year yet, but last year, we were upwards of like 130 million people watching the Game Awards. And if you look at like any of the DICE rebroadcasts, it's a couple tens of thousands of viewers. So even if you stack them all up together across like multiple streaming services, it's just not the same scale. And I think they are very much a industry-focused awards show, which does something different. And it's like if you made the Oscars much, much smaller, but then they didn't depend on viewership anymore. Right. It would change what the organization is. So they're not, like the parallels to the Oscars are somewhat useful, and the parallels to the Globes are also somewhat useful, but it is its own thing. Yeah.
I do want to add though, like in terms of like the internet archiving, the Game Awards are preserving game trailers.
Yes. So maybe we can get into this because I really want to talk about this 10th anniversary in terms of like its vibe.
Do it.
And the way that it worked. So vibe-wise, it felt very much like they have in the last couple of years, but it also had a bit more edge in terms of actually talking about industry stuff, which we'll get to when we talk about the Game of the Year speech that Sven Vinke of Larian Studios gave prior, like announcing the winner. But the amount of trailers, and again, we are a day after, I haven't run like a quant analysis. My knowledge based on work that Jan Svelch has done he's over at Charles University in Prague, is that these are usually like 40 to 50% ad. Which is like a lot of ad.
It felt like a lot more.
And I was watching this with my partner, who has she's never watched one of these. She is interested in games, but she loves trailers. So she was like, I want to just see what's coming out. Like, it's going to be great. We got Witcher trailer. We got a new Elden Ring multiplayer like side expansion game trailer, like back to back.
It's its own game.
Yeah, it's like a standalone, right?
Yeah.
We got that. We got the new Naughty Dog
IP reveal.
Yeah, intergalactic
product placement. Intergalactic product placement. The game.
This is bad.
Adidas
I should
and Sony. That's what I took away.
We got the new Naughty Dog game.
Adidas, Sony, lightsaber.
Yeah. We got the EA Mafia: The Old Country game. Like, there were a lot of the big ticket AAA trailers that you expect. We got a trailer from Ueda, the maker of Ico and Last Guardian and Shadow of the Colossus,
for a vague game that may appear
looked weird
at some point in the next 10 years. Yeah,
very similar to when we got the Last Guardian trailer a couple of years back. Really, we got an Okami trailer. Those, I think, are not where people have issues. So I think that ad time, people are like, "This is great. We're hearing from developers that we haven't heard from in 5+ years. I'm happy this new game is coming out." And I think what is really like driving up that percentage time and is frankly a bit like bloating the show, but probably sustaining it financially really, is the repeat trailers. So there's a lot of like service game updates that are coming up now, or like small interstitial ads. There's the Amazon Prime call outs that were around that as well.
There's also like minor new game announcements for games that look shockingly like Concord.
Yes.
That were like, they're still going to release this, huh?
The team shooter stuff is certainly part of it, and it feels a bit like a lot. And so I do want to make a difference, for example, when I see a trailer for like new zones, new characters in like Honkai Star Rail and Zenless Zone Zero, like the MiHoYo games. Those are somewhere on the ridge for me, where they're kind of new trailers for new parts of games, but they're also kind of promoting an existing like service model that exists. It's weird, and I don't know, like, my feelings change about this all the time, whether I want that or not at these awards, which is really me thinking about like the function of the award. Because if the function of the award is to provide these like $250,000 a pop like ads, and that sustains the rest of the body, I can like knuckle under and accept that this is what's needed for the rest of the stuff to work. But that means that the rest of the show needs to really work for what the awards are. And so the vibe to me felt like relatively same. However, there was like a much stronger sense of legacy, and especially like Jeff Keighley talking about like how he feels personally rewarded and appreciated because of the success of the show, because of the growth of the show, because people like Ueda are sharing exclusive trailers with him because of the work that I think he talks about, his journalistic work coming out of college in 2005, which landed him the gig to work at G4, where he worked on G4ia, which was another Game Awards show, and Spike afterwards. Like, he is very embedded in this, and I get I know that people have feelings about him. I'm still like making up my mind about where I stand on what he means to game development and to this entire like archival
the
project.
Entire process of like game promotion, both for the public and within the industry itself, because like this has supplanted a lot of trade shows as well.
There was a joke that it ate E3.
It did,
and it did, and Keighley also runs Summer Game Fest, which ate another part of E3. He's involved with Gamescom in Cologne, Germany. He's involved with TGS in Japan. Like, he is the guy, and there really is no equivalent for any other show. Every other like body is institutional in nature. This one is him.
Yeah.
And secondarily, it's Kojima, who pops up at every show. You want like it's time to bring out Kojima.
I referred to it yesterday as we did our watch in the lab as, it's my yearly bathroom break for the Game Awards.
Yeah. So I love Kojima. But
I do want to say though, for some reason, even though structurally it felt the same as other years, there was something about the vibes that was maybe a bit more confident in itself.
Yes.
That made it infinitely more watchable to me, outside of like the onstage cringe parts.
So there are some humor, like some of the humor doesn't land.
Yeah, but that's any award show, right? You can't fault them for that. But like, I've always had trouble actually sitting through the Game Awards, and I was both called out, but I don't know, kind of reassured that they are confident enough in understanding what they're producing. When earlier in the show, I was like, I made a comment, and then Statler and Waldorf repeated that comment midway through the show, where they were talking about like, this is awards crammed in between hours
Ads.
of commercials, and I was like, oh,
There were
they know what this is.
There were self-deprecating jokes that I think the Statler and Waldorf characters kind of let them do it both ways, where it's a joke, but it also diffuses the critique.
Yeah.
So you can't be like, oh, there's so many ads, this 8E3, like, why are there so many Hollywood people around the show? Because they're doing it for you, right? And this is, to me, like, the three parts of the show, vibe-wise, are Keeley being noticeably emotional about the 10th anniversary, which I get. Like, the guy's been doing this since he was 12 years old.
Right.
He might not be my favorite person in the industry, but he's clearly super devoted to his vision of what this is.
Right. Yeah.
The second part is the commercial part, which the Statler and Waldorf like performances really gesture to, and the third part, which is super important and is, I think, going to factor into this discussion a little bit, is the place that Hollywood has at the table, which is still large but a bit different from last year. So obviously there was like one of the announcements, I think for best performance was Harrison Ford, right? Brought in by Troy Baker, who is the voice actor for the new Indiana Jones game that just came out. And that was like, have your candy and eat it too. That's like bringing out Al Pacino. That's like bringing out...
This was even stranger, though, because Harrison Ford is like... notoriously a man who does not like doing things.
He doesn't need to be there. This is the other thing too. Like, if he didn't want to be there,
he could just say no.
Harrison Ford is ultimately the guy.
Unless it was a
I'm
clause in the contract of using his likeness for the game or something.
Maybe there's contractual
I doubt
obligation.
Or maybe they had that bag and Harrison Ford was like, for how many minutes do I get this $1 million?
Yeah, there are some other... One of the other like meeting points where this was incredibly apparent, because like last year we had a lot of these celebrity-run game studios that popped up. So there was like the Matthew McConaughey announcement. There was like a strategy game that was announced by Simu Liu. We had a lot of that stuff. This year we got Snoop, who was there for a performance, but also like is now effectively running a studio. TBD what that's going to look like. The one that got me the most and was really like kind of written onto the prompter was the Laura Bailey, Aaron Paul. You're the best.
That segment, in our lab watch, we were very confused by their chemistry, quote unquote.
So I think there was like a level of, they clearly get along, but there's clearly a lot of like teleprompted joke in there.
Right.
The vibe for me, because my partner was asking me the same thing, like, why is this here? This is so long and it's kind of cringe. And I was like, the purpose of this is to get Aaron Paul to say to the audience, I'm starstruck when Laura Bailey is around.
Yeah.
Game performers make me feel starstruck, and Laura Bailey to say the same thing to Aaron Paul. And kind of, she makes a joke about it where she's like, I know it's on the prompter, but like it feels good to hear that from you. That, I think, encapsulates the entirety of the show's project over the last 30 years, which is legitimating what games are, not to games people, which DICE and the IGDAs do, but to the audience at large that is consuming other kinds of media.
Yeah, hard to agree.
That's really it. And this is maybe the most like naked version we've gotten of that, where it's like, it's just like they're making them say it instead of doing it through the fact that everybody has to wear a suit,
being dragged in
my grandkids play games
to parade him in front of where he doesn't know where he is. I do want to say, because we're probably not going to cover Snoop again, do you think that Snoop's game development company will produce the first game you can smoke? Like they would need some kind of new controller that you have to like inhale to breathe in the
tokometer,
the tachometer.
So that was certainly, I think, interesting for me. Now, the other aspect of this, which is tied to the advertisement. I think before we get to like the game of the year itself, because I think we're not going to cover every category.
Yeah, it's not a recap.
I do want to talk about like what that field has looked like in past years, but before that, I want to talk about like the general vibe after the show, just some of the trailers.
Sure.
And it is incredible to watch the show in absentia. Like I used to live tweet the shows, and I was like very like split. My attention was split between watching the show, taking my own notes for research, being on Discord, being on Twitter. I was just like doing 4 things at the time.
Yep.
Yesterday I got pizza. I sat down and I was talking to you and our colleague Courtney, and I was I didn't open social media. So this is like the first time I'm talking about this in any public fashion.
And then for me as well, I was not on the internet during the awards. No. I was talking to Andrei, and then we were doing a watch in our research lab. Yeah. With just a couple people.
So I opened Reddit afterwards, and let me tell you, the amount of doomsaying about Witcher 4, which is supposed to feature Ciri, a female character, inside the new installment, and not Geralt, who traditionally was the protagonist, but also in the books was not always the protagonist, and retired. And, you know, insert jokes about it being called like Woker 4, and talking about like strong female representation and stuff like this. And a lot of like very strong like reactions to not casting Geralt. And it wasn't just for this. It also happened with a new intergalactic game from Naughty Dog, which features Tati Gabrielle, who's on Sabrina the Teenage Witch and the Uncharted movie, and has been around like nerd culture and games, woman of color. The reactions were about as vitriolic as you can imagine. I'm not going to repeat them here. And to that I say, I have no time for it, because these games look great, and really the measure of it should be whether or not the gameplay feels good, the narrative is compelling, and people who would like to have game experiences about them and have never had them, or get them significantly less statistically, which is still the case.
Or you know, I'm just add on to it, who now cannot get them without a barrage of bullshit attached to it. It's still not like like the obstacle is there's a new obstacle added to the representation going well, which is that just being able to get it and enjoy it. It seems like it is a thing that is not going to be achieved in the foreseeable future, because these folks are not going away with a trailer that looks as good as The Witcher 4's
There were
did.
Immediately commentaries very reminiscent of the Horizon Forbidden West reveal, which was like, Ciri doesn't look the same. They didn't keep her as svelte as she was, or whatever, and people are responding about like, the character has aged. Who knows how long this is? Oh, she can't be a Witcher. The technology was lost, and then it's like, it's a fantasy game. There will be some justification in the writing, and other people saying like The Witcher used to be like a conservative paradise in terms of like messaging. To which I reply, there is a book written in 1991 by Sapkowski where Geralt gives a pro-choice speech during a fight. Like, legitimately, it's just on the page. So these books they've always been, like, progressive bellwethers out of Poland. Like, they're talking about racism, xenophobia, misogyny. Like, it is part of the text of The Witcher 3.
Yeah, but, I mean, a lot of the audience is they're reading the material in The Witcher games that is set up for the critique as the face value of the material. So, which again,
it was a bit jarring, and I did this to myself. I just should stop opening social media for the most part. So that, I think, is part of the outsized part. Now, inside the show, the other like the counter aspect of this is there was overt discussion about the industry and about layoffs,
right?
In a way that I think is fully like just different, and kind of I think was being asked of like developers participating and going on stage to sort of be addressed last year. So when Sven Vinke won, or Larian won, and Sven Vinke gave the accepting speech last year, they managed to talk a little bit about layoffs that I think were happening in the industry, but they were quickly played off, and there was significant critique of both Keighley and the organizing body in general not addressing A, conditions in the industry, and B, Palestine,
Right.
which are things that are just, they were on the table. And this year, that was certainly not the case. So there was a award given for the Game Changer of the Year to Amir Satvat, who runs like a LinkedIn, an incredibly popular LinkedIn list for people to network and find work, which is built because of instability in the industry. And Sven Vinke's acknowledging speech discussed this directly and the limitations of having to design for return on investment, for quarterly profits, for games as service earnings, which is slowly atrophying creativity.
Yep.
I talk about this all the time in my work. AAA development, the formalization at the heart of it is strangling creatives, and it kills studios and then moves on to pillage other ones as capital investment. So the industry part was I'm sure we could have more discussion about it, but compared to previous years, this was a standout surprise and something that I like a lot. And for people who did not notice, Sven went on stage with a watermelon pin. So this was done fully in the context of a lot of different mitigating factors around the globe and conflicts that are happening. This wasn't the case last year,
right.
And it certainly hadn't been the case in the past. So there's Amir gave a speech about like the industry, and Sven gave it as well in his like announcement for Game of the Year, and Keighley himself also talked about instability and layoffs in the industry, and you can clearly see him when Amir is getting the Game Changer Award, which is sort of like their Gene Herschel Lifetime Achievement Award. That is like, they want to give a prize, but it doesn't fit into any of the categories. They gave it to him. Mm-hmm. This required forethought, and there's a way to read this cynically where you can say the organization's protecting itself by like actually dealing with this in a way that's amenable to them. I don't care. It's still on there. Like, it's still up front for people to see in a way where otherwise they might not. So that's all great. Sorry, I got like very heated about like this.
No, I think it's worth being heated about. And I do want to say, like, that was also a huge surprise for us, especially for the Game Changer Award part. But there was a little like a video package that went along with that.
Yes.
And one of my colleagues in the lab, who is very involved in the student unions here, mentioned, well, that was a lot of talk, and not at any point did they mention the word union, which is actually a really important part in solving the problem.
Yeah. So this is the limitation, and why I say we could have a stronger discussion about it. Much like we have a problem in terms of like what the voting body can do at this award and how they think because of the corporate like structure behind it. This certainly affects what you can have on the telecast.
Yeah.
The money is funding this show that's coming from companies. And clearly, Microsoft and Sony don't want to have like a show that is effectively telling their own workers to unionize.
Yeah.
That is a separate discussion. I think we maybe should devote a whole episode to at some point and get somebody in who is working for game unions and
for sure.
talk about. But yeah. I guess the other two things that I want to do is I want to talk about the makeup of the Game of the Year, which now we are 11 shows in, 10th anniversary, and there are some clear patterns starting to develop. So Ethan Gatch, who's a game journalist, had a piece about it on his Substack, and I think Ollie Welsh, who runs like the Game of the Year, like the Game Awards watch like segment at Polygon, both have talked about this. There is starting to be a mold, kind of like when we talk about Oscar bait.
Yeah.
We are starting to see this now 10 years in.
This is exactly what we were talking about yesterday.
The Game Awards.
Yeah.
And it's super interesting. So I want to, first off, the game that won this year, Astrobot, right? A Sony Interactive Entertainment produced, theoretically AA production. That is a
nostalgia
family.
Game.
It's a nostalgia play. It's also like a 3D platformer, and it's a family game, which is relatively unconventional at first glance. So I think that is an important thing to think about. So if we want to talk about games that have won in the past, we have had, so last year we had Baldur's Gate 3. Let's run them very quickly.
Sure, go for it.
Okay. So Astrobot, third person, like action adventure platformer. but for family. Baldur's Gate 3, a CRPG, a game that has never won any other award, but is still notably like an RPG. It's a narrative-driven, large-scale
genre. You mean?
Yeah. So it's like the scale of it is large. Right. It's like the biggest of that kind.
A lot
game.
Of text. It's text-heavy game,
but also
really
like,
written
in terms of like character interactions. Like it's a lot of game. Let's put it that way. Your prior Elden Ring, third-person action adventure. Massive expansive world, a lot of text in items, not in the main narrative, but still. Year before, It Takes Two, a really like noticeable deviation from the norm. I only played it marginally. You loved
It's
It
fantastic.
Takes Two. And we got a like sequel,
and
like
I'm
a
all
new
in.
announcement.
I mean,
Joseph Ferris constantly probably being a nightmare for his PR team because he's constantly swearing on stage and being incredibly like...
I empathize.
Yeah, he's excited to be there. You can tell.
Yeah.
Year before, 2020, Last of Us Part 2. Third person, narrative, open world, large. Year before that, Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Another Souls game. Year before that, God of War.
Yeah.
Year before that, Zelda Breath of the Wild.
Okay.
There's a mold.
Yeah.
These look a certain way. Year before that, Overwatch. Noticeable departure again, but still like a kind of like It Takes Two. Although it would be interesting to talk about like the difference between It Takes Two, Astrobot, and Overwatch, which I think are not exactly the same as the other ones on this list. 2015, The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt, and 2014, the inaugural one, Dragon Age Inquisition.
Yeah.
So there's been 11 awards and 8 of
quote
these.
unquote gamery games.
They are the most AAA, large-scale, third-person narrative or narrative-focused games from storied studios.
Yeah.
It Takes Two and Astrobot, I think, and this is not me trying to like throw shade on the other nominees, are winning in a relatively weaker AAA field that left room open for AA and indie games. Veilguard did not make the cut.
Yeah.
Star Wars Outlaws did not make the cut. Assassin's Creed Shadows was pushed back. A lot of the large-scale AAA games that were supposed to hit this year didn't or got delayed. And that creates a more even playing field. So if we want to talk about like nominations for games that got the most nominations this year, Astrobot with 7, and Final Fantasy Rebirth with 7, Metaphor Fantasio with 6, and then Balatro, Black Myth Wukong, Elden Ring DLC, and Silent Hill 2 with 5 each. There are some more for 4 and stuff. Compare this to, for example, the year that God of War won, which had 11 nominations across the board, and Elden Ring had 8, right? So there was a stronger concentration and showing, and this is a kind of indicator, is if you see certain games in Game of the Year, you can kind of tell that they're going to win their respective categories. So like Balatro being nominated was like a tip-off that it was probably going to sweep independent, and I can't remember which other award it won right now. So those are some like cases where you can kind of tell this. Now, we can make the case that Astrobot is kind of an in-betweener. It's neither one of those like AAA looking games, but it is kind of DNA-wise very similar. Overwatch, I think, kind of just brute forced the field. It was an event. It was really hard to claim that it wasn't going to win when I think that was all I was hearing about for that entire year. And even after the game became increasingly more critiqued for its management of the online systems and the community and everything, people still were like, this is a fantastic game. Now, this year, we had Balatro, we had Black Myth Wukong, which was a modest success, Elden Ring, which that was just courting controversy, and every award where it was nominated, I was like, if they don't get it in, it's going to dodge a lot of controversy with like nominating a DLC as opposed to a standalone game.
Right.
Final Fantasy Rebirth is a remake. It is a significantly different remake, but it is still like somewhat different than like a new IP.
Did Rebirth win anything last night?
They won for score and music. Audio design was won by Senua Saga Hellblade 2. So they effectively won for adapting a soundtrack that people love
already.
So we could talk about nostalgia a little bit. And that's not shade on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth as a game. I know you significantly liked the part that you played. And
Well, I haven't played much.
Yeah, and our colleague Jules loved it, but had complicated opinions. It's not like an easy win. It's really interesting that film is having a very similar year where the field is very even and flat. So a lot of stuff is like getting through that normally wouldn't, and there's less concentration of the awards. Now, all this said, what is super interesting to me is that in all of these years, there has been significant concentration in the studios and the publishers that win. So as a good example, From Software has been nominated 5 times in 11 years for Game of the Year. They've won twice. Nintendo EPD has also been nominated 5 times. They've only won once. And then a bunch of other studios. I think Insomniac's been nominated 3 times, never won. Capcom nominated 4 times, never won. And then Blizzard, Naughty Dog, Santa Monica Studios, Guerrilla Games, id Software, Kojima Productions, Remedy Entertainment, and Square Enix have all been nominated twice, with Blizzard Entertainment, Naughty Dog, and Santa Monica winning once. If I read this to you, this would be like the industrial core of double to AAA production that is located in the United States and in Japan.
Right.
Like, it is wild how concentrated the developers are. And if you look at it from the publisher side, it's even more egregious. Sony Interactive Entertainment has been nominated 13 times. So they've been nominated more than there are years, because often they're running 2 campaigns.
Oh, it makes sense. It's
won 3 times.
Company,
Nintendo's been nominated 10 times, won once. Bethesda and Capcom 4 times, never won. EA and Bandai Namco have been nominated 3 times. EA has won twice. Namco won once. Blizzard and Square Enix have been nominated twice, with Blizzard winning once.
But listen, maybe that Monster Hunter Wilds win is coming, huh?
Yeah.
For Capcom.
There is a third metric to keep in context, which is not developers or publishers, but it's the amount of times that franchises are nominated. So Resident Evil and Super Mario have been nominated 3 times. Elden Ring, God of War, Zelda, Doom, Final Fantasy, Horizon, and Marvel Spider-Man have all been nominated twice. We have strong, like really strong incumbent bias. It is incredibly hard for a studio that is new on the board to ever access these.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, part of what we're talking about when we talk about like what happens when a press body, which is really thinking about franchises and the history of games and their perceptions as a critical medium, does to the shape of that game. It normalizes certain features as like important. This is how you wind up, like 80 odd years into the Academy with people basically saying like certain movies are Oscar bait and the Oscars are so white, and there are patterns that emerge over time.
You're not going to get a lot of experimental cinema in the Best Picture category.
And this is the thing, like when we think about like the Oscars right now, the Academy is something like 4,800 members wide, if not more. I might be off on my numbers, but we are in like the high thousands, as opposed to 131 members. That shifts somewhat. And then the Game of the Year, noticeably, like the weighting of the award is 90% for the journalistic outlets and 10% of the entire population. So to count this, what they do is, let's say there are 130 million people watching, 100 million of them voted. That cohesive grade is going to be like it's going to be like rescaled down to be 10% of the weighting.
Right.
So there is some popular weighting, which also I think fudges the numbers a little bit in terms of like what's happening, because it's not like the critical body is not like fully in control, but there is something happening here. And there might be years where like if you have a flat field, the population is going to have like might be like the tiebreaker between 2 halves. This is like when you have 2 actors running against each other for the same movie or the same game. And you're like, there's going to be a weird thing now where like they're going to cut votes from each other, and the performance that's in third place, which is not cutting votes from another one, kind of wins. Even though it's nominally the third one, it's because people are disagreeing on 1 and 2 in a way that's weird. So there's a lot of like funky metrics to think about. So the thing that's apparent to me coming out of these awards is that Astro Bot is a fantastic game. It had like 11 nominations. Obviously, people were very into it. I'm really happy a family game won, which is rare. But it is still like the most traditional in terms of both the studio and the genre that a game like this could be. And they did a lot of innovative stuff with the haptic controller and like really drawing out a lot of the PS5's early like console possibilities, which is always great. And we're going to probably have this discussion like 2-3 years with the company that's going to do this at the end cycle of what the PS5 is. And it's going to like max out kind of like God of War did with the PS4. We're going to be like, this is the most you can do technically. But we are in a field where the show is simultaneously talking about like the game industry and is consistently rewarding the products of the segment of the games industry that is like the most caustic to its worker base.
Right.
And if we were in a Guild Award situation, I do wonder if we would get more indie, more weight for indies, and more weight for AAs. And I do want to shout out Courtney, who's been on the pod sometimes, Courtney Blamey, who runs Gamerella here at Concordia, which is like a feminist, like BIPOC friendly, like marginalized folk friendly game jam. For we were chatting about this, and she was like, it really does feel like a screw you to all the studios that have worked on certain games when fighting's off the telecast, indies off the telecast, sports games like off the like when I say off the telecast, they're being announced, but they're like interstitial.
Oh, they get no time. No, there was a question yesterday from people in our lab who had never watched the awards before, who when they do like these rapid fire lists, the question was like very earnestly, it wasn't a dig at the awards, it was a very honest like, but then what's the award? Like you don't get that moment of consecration when you get a representative of your studio up on stage to say, this is me, this is what we do.
Yeah.
And especially for the indie space, studios who might be operating maybe a bit more ethically, if that's the term we want to use for it. I'll certainly use it for this, in terms of how they're treating their workers, in terms of even the artistic process, where there's a lot more maybe humanity built into the systems in place to actually produce the art that is a video game. There's no time for that. And that's a failing. It's
weird, and this is why, like, maybe this is the last segment of our talk.
Like, the only human I come away knowing anything about from the Game Awards, other than maybe Sven this year, is Jeff Keighley every time. And all I have is a simulacrum of a man who represents the concentration of commercial...
Well, I think
prestige game advertising.
This is, to me, maybe like a spoiler.
Which has nothing to do with Jeff Keighley, the guy. It's the idea.
Maybe this is a spoiler for like the book and where I'm at now, and it might change by the time this comes out in God knows how long. But it does feel like the award, like the purpose of the awards is to simultaneously like bound what the art form and the industry is supposed to be. And it effectively duplicates the economic arrangement you see in the real world, which is big studios get the screen time. Small studios are mentioned, but not really brought on all that much. Although we can make we can have a discussion that the studio working on Astrobot did get like more than most, like Team Asobi got more than most of these like mid-sized studios. I think they mentioned in the speech that there's about like 60 some people that are working on this, which is not an indie production, but it's certainly not like what a Ubisoft production looks like when you're talking about like an Assassin's Creed, and it's like leveraging like a super stratified like Fordist model of like game production, where everything is separated across like an 11-floor building with hundreds of people pitching in
with some transatlantic communication as well.
So to me, I think you're right, because there's an optimistic way to read this, which I'm like, it's great. They're getting more game people in finally to announce. And by the way, this has been like an ongoing interest of mine and is also part of the project, is like who's announcing Game of the Year, which sometimes it's people who have worked in the past and sometimes it's not. So a good example of this is last year, the Game of the Year announcement, which went to Larian for Baldur's Gate 3, was done by Modded Controller 360, also known as Timothy Chalamet, based on his YouTube where he used to mod Xbox 360 controllers, which was the joke. But if it was like this year, we had Vinka, who had won last year, nominating. It should have been Hidetaka Miyazaki for Elden Ring.
Right.
Miyazaki was not there. Make of that what you will. Miyazaki was awarded, I think, by
the flight from Japan is not always a thing you want to take. Like,
yeah, I think it was Joseph Ferris who was the one announcing the new like It Takes Two sequel, because he had won the year prior. When Ferris won in 2021, it was Christopher Nolan. The people who won in 20, oh god, the math is off. Like, I need to make sure I'm getting all of this like right. So no, sorry. Ferris announced Miyazaki for Elden Ring, and Ferris himself was announced by Druckmann, who had won the year prior for Last of Us, but Druckmann was announced by Chris Nolan.
right, okay.
So there's like this weird interweaving between sometimes it's Hollywood and sometimes it's not.
Yeah.
The performances are almost always done by actors now, like Hollywood actors, which again, make of that what you will, but the weird like stratification between Hollywood actors and then like Troy Baker and Nolan North, who got a shout out, and then like the entire ununionized sum of voice actors who work in the industry is something.
Yeah.
Right? These awards, if you're at any other show, like, give an example, last year at the Oscars, when the consecration, I think, for The Godfather was done by Tony Hawk, people lost their shit. Because they were like, why am I hearing about film history from Tony Hawk? I don't have any issues with him, but like clearly there must be somebody else in these tens of thousands of people who work in the industry who could speak more with more proximity about this. And so the show is in this weird state where we're starting to see more winners participating in the consecration. And this is really like the part of my project, is thinking about how the process of this is utilizing Hollywood people to consecrate your like canon of creators who will then consecrate newcomers as incumbents, and you're witnessing it in real time.
Yeah.
Like we're going to talk about this in 10 years. I'm going to be curious how many actors are there, but it is weird still. And I'm sure some people are like, I don't need to hear from Snoop Dogg about his...
No, dude, in 4 years, when The Witcher 4 is about to get its win, with an army of people outside the building protesting woke Siri, Snoop Dogg's gonna baptize that game in bong water, baby.
Let's go. So I guess we can wrap up just like we're 10 years out. You know, if I'm happy it's gone for 10 years. Like, we've had a critical discussion right now, much like anybody who's like on an industry pod talking about like any other awards show. I just want these to be better. Like, I don't want them to go away.
And it was better.
It was certainly compared to some of the other shows, which I do want to like always have an asterisk that like the 2020 and 2021 shows were like COVID era productions, which added a lot of complications. I think 2020 was the one that was fully remote.
For sure.
What would you want to see for the 20th? Like, if you had one thing to pick where you would be like, I kind of hope this is fixed, or I see this.
I think what I want out of these is never going to happen, which is, but again, this is the kind of person I am. I don't really like ceremony or like pomp and circumstance. Like, I'm never going to get what I want, which is less ads, less of the, like, the performance of it all, and give the creators some time to speak on behalf of themselves and their teams. The creators who aren't Kojima. It's like,
love Kojima. That's again not a.
It's fine, but
him,
like, Kojima gets so much airtime everywhere. You're never really getting something new from him, and there are so many people who work in the industry, and it's a creative industry in the sense that, like, obviously it's a creative industry, but like there's a bunch of people who think outside the box within it who should get the floor.
Well, I think Sven's speech is the closest we've gotten to that. It
is really good.
But it's interesting that he had to do it this year because last year they played him off.
Well, he even made that comment, if you win next year, you'll get to come back and talk for 3 minutes. And he used his 3 minutes.
Yeah.
To be, honestly like very polite, but everything he's saying is in the rest, right? Like it was excellent.
I think if I had one thing, which is I think in line with yours, and this is a really like a technical recommendation. You know, I'm armchairing a show that I don't vote on, and right now I'm like really working as an outsider. We need to stop shunting a lot of categories to interstitial ads, and like there's been a lot of writing about like the sci-tech Oscars, which are like the super technical Oscars that happen prior to the main telecast, like the day prior. They get their own night. They're not televised, but at least they get a full night of recognition. And I'm like,
but like, why couldn't you like put broadcast on YouTube a less bombastic version of this in a room that you rent? Surely they have the funds to do this.
I mean, they're doing,
because you can put on an event like that at a university that has no money. And set up your cameras.
The space is rented every year, so ostensibly they could tack on another like more
rent a hotel conference center. Do something for these folks.
For me, and this like. For people who are in film, this happened with sound. They shunted sound off the telecast, and sound editors and designers freaked the fuck out. And they were militant about getting them back on the telecast, and the person who I think was the president of the Academy, who was a sound editor, quit. Like he just gave his resignation because of how much this angered him, and the year after they brought it back on. And
imagine going to the movies and watching anything with no sound.
I think
it's half the game.
I think there are two awards. One which was in the show but didn't get like a speech, which is Best Independent, which is fully unacceptable. And the other one is Best Innovation, which preceded the show and was won by Astrobot. So the Team Asobi people got to talk later, but they were in the part that runs before the show officially kicks off, which is like 30 minutes prior. And quite frankly, to me, and I'm not like a big fashion guy, but like the other thing that I would want to see is if we're doing this, I
beg to differ.
Listen, if we're going, I am a fashion guy.
Yeah, I love your little square shoes.
If we're gonna do the pomp and circumstance, like if we're doing it, if this is what the show is, commit to it. And it's time to actually foreground developers who are showing up and give them a chance to talk outside of the Peacock Center and have like your ET style, like 1 hour red carpet show where viewers can get a lot of face time outside of the award speech with these developers. That's how you build awareness of these people as people, right? My partner was watching this, and Courtney was commenting a lot about the fashion. Like the tartan dress that I think the speaker from Warframe had. There was a joke about somebody's sweater eating them in one of the speeches, like a very tall, like looking sweater. Like these people are clearly showing up. They're putting the money to get dressed. This is part of like showcasing themselves to the community and the world at large. And I would much rather have 30 minutes of them than have like 10 minutes of Amazon Prime rebates on the games.
Yeah, I'm telling you the exact same
weird
thing.
Ads.
It's exact same thing.
Like the show
Let them cook.
The show is 3 hours and a half. It's long. That's fine. The interstitials are there. Every other show has skits. That's fine too. But I need more time for at least... Don't shunt like entire segments of the industry out. And this is going to be an ongoing discussion of like, okay, well, if we're going to put in a couple of them, then why not all of them? You know, I'm on the Sean Fantasy train of like, make this 5 hours and just give everybody time. And sure, not everybody's going to tune in, but like...
They're not going to do that.
They're not. But in an ideal world, they should.
Make it 2 nights like WrestleMania.
So I just hope that when we're having this discussion... Like we're going to be having it for years to come, but especially like in 5 or 10 years when we're having like another like decade or half decade retrospective, that like some of these pressure points are alleviated, and like the show is like 50% like advertisement time relative to our talk about the cost of having ad time at Summer Game Fest. My understanding is that it's very similar to this. So hundreds of thousands of dollars for like a minute or two. I get that it's a lot of money and you're broadcasting to 100 million plus people every time you do it. But like, maybe we take the L on like, you know, like $2 million of revenue to actually increase the function of the award, which will translate into better perception of the show, better perceptions of the organization, better perceptions of Jeff Keighley as a steward of this segment of the field, if that's what he wants to be.
Right.
And it will translate into better sales for those studios based on visibility, which that's still like the question mark that's looming at the end of this. And maybe we'll have some answers in a couple of years. It's still really hard to tell if these do translate into some kind of material makeup or if they offer a more cultural function. We might never know that, but you know, I do still think that they're important regardless of whether or not people are making money off of the award that they're winning. And I guess like my end on this is I like this show a lot more than I liked the 2023 one.
Agreed.
And probably more than I've liked many others, even if I'm not like an Astrobot like dedicated player. I'm happy for the Team Asobi people. I think it is a deserved win based on what we heard about this game all year. And I kind of hope we just keep going in this direction where like the show seems in tune with larger and larger swaths of, you know, to quote Brandon Keogh, like these industries, of which there are many in different national contexts.
The field.
Yes.
Celebrate the field, not the industry.
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
So that's where I'm at, and this has been my like 1 hour rant about this award.
Thank you. I appreciate it. It's a great rant.
You know, tune in next year for however I feel.
Probably bad.
Okay. I'm hoping not.
Thanks for listening.
Bye.